So, it's 1994. Nelson Mandela is soon to become the first democratically elected president of South Africa. I was 14 years old. At the time, I was in Standard 7, or what is now known as Grade 9. For the first time ever in my life, this idea of social activism was directed at me. I mean, I'd heard of strikes, I'd seen boycotts, I had seen activism around me, but for the first time, it was directed at me as a young student in high school. What had happened was that on the 15th of February, we still hadn't received our textbooks in high school, so we were sharing books so in a class of 50 or 40, there'd be 25 to 20 books, and we'd share these books amongst ourselves. So on the one day, a book would go to the one kid, on the next day, it would go to another child. So homework was quite a mission. Some students came into every single class and interrupted classes as lessons were happening, and they called us out to the school courtyard where assembly was normally held. It was at around 10 a.m. in the morning. Assembly was held at 8 that morning, so they called us out there because an impromptu and what seemed to be a disorganized assembly was called. A boy by the name of Lefatse stood in front of us. And back then, to me, social activism was riddled with images of placards, of the student representative councils, of images such as this one, where people wanted things to change, and Lefatse was one of these kids. Prior to that day, Lefatse was just another kid who was 2 grades ahead of me. He must have been about 16 or 17 years old. So Lefatse stood in front of the whole school with the teachers about 10, 20 meters behind him and said, "We demand textbooks. We cannot study like this." So essentially what that meant was that at 10 o'clock in the morning, school was out because people were marching to their municipal offices, which was awesome because some kids sneaked away to go play video games. I might have been one of them. So then school was out at 10 o'clock in the morning and everybody marched to the municipal offices. And what was a turning point to me at the time is that the face of leadership was changing. The face of influence had changed. The face that every single day led us to class and led us to where we were meant to be in school was now taken over by this young man who was 2 grades ahead of me, by this guy that I've always seen in school and thought he was one of us. This is when I realized that later on in my life that influence was a hugely important thing, that leadership was not where leadership in our minds was appointed or people elected, that people lead from everywhere. That Lefatse was this young guy who drove an action. From that day, every single thing that teachers said or that the authority figures had put in front of us had to be given a stamp of approval by ourselves. The children who were at the back, the people who were never noticed. In 2007, I discovered blogging, and as a blogger, I was building this small community of young entrepreneurs because I'd run a business prior to that which didn't succeed. And what I realized coming out of this experience was the fact that aside from the many reasons that the business did not succeed, it was also because I didn't know the right kind of people. I didn't have the right kind of networks, and other young 20-something-year-olds did not have these kind of networks, and it was difficult, almost impossible for them to build these businesses. So I discovered blogging, and I realized that with a single post, with a single piece of writing, I could reach out to the world. I could reach out to some of my favorite international authors. But at the same time, I realized that the narrative that we were spreading was a story that was emulated from other parts of the world and repurposed for South Africa or for Africa. as opposed to a story that Africans were sharing authentically. So these niches that we kept creating as people, these small groups that separated us from the boxes that we were told we were in, or that we were supposedly in as people, ensured that there were these almost infinite sets of interests that every single person can lead. I mean, if you look on the internet, there are people who are interested in the romance of robots, you know? And as a result, this notion of influence, this notion of leading people from different parts of interest or different parts of the world started in 2007, reigniting that spark, which in 1994 had started in my life already. A friend of mine by the name of Chris Dykes started an initiative called the Bookshelf Project. So Chris was talking to a couple of friends over a dinner table, and they were talking about this children's home that's out in Cosmo City, which is in the north of Johannesburg, next to the Lanseria Airport for our Cape Townian friends. So this children's home had just started out, and there were no books there. And one of the friends realized that she has a few books, and among the 5 or 6 of them, they collected these books and built their first bookshelf, which is about 3 meters by, I think, 5 meters high. And they took it to this one initiative. And instead of the story that's been told, or the story, again, that we are being told, the story of this dwindling literacy amongst young people, these guys, it's just the 4 of them, built this bookshelf and they took it there. This was 4 years ago. To date, they've, I think, donated about 10,000 books. The South African business community has taken up this initiative, and they're now spreading it themselves. In fact, they fund every single bookshelf because they realized that with the 2nd and 3rd and 4th bookshelf, there were costs. They had incurred costs. They'd finished all the children's books in their network, so they had to go out and look for other books. So this idea of influence, and coupled with collaboration, enables us to build these small communities that build themselves out and enable other people to reach their dream. It enables us to self-organize. And it's what the internet has slightly given us. But if you think back, people have always self-organized in Africa. People have always self-organized around the world. With time, we began thinking, or being sold into this idea that the stories that we tell, the stories that we share in and among ourselves, are not worth telling anymore, because there was another narrative that had started growing. In this book called Tribes, Seth Godin follows the stories of individuals who built up communities which he calls tribes. In this book, and among these communities, Seth Godin realizes that we all want to be part of an idea, of a bigger idea, an idea that far surpasses the initiator, something that has always been true. It becomes even truer when among 10, 20, 200 people, we start building up the spark. We start building up this fire, this flame. There was another study in which it stated that in order for you to build a meaningful community or a meaningful idea that grows and surpasses the initiator or the influencer or the leader, it needs 100 to 150 committed people around the world. 100 people. Whereas as we've always followed this narrative or this idea that in order for you to lead or build something really meaningful, you need thousands and thousands of people, whereas it's probably only the core 100 or the core 150 in any community who spread that idea. So essentially, today, I would like to challenge you. I would like to challenge you to come out there and speak up about your idea. People are waiting for you to lead. Africa, South Africa, is waiting for you to share a story and rewrite history. Thank you.